I mean, if I was a human on this planet and I found out about this, I'd be so mad at her. I mean, she looks pretty dope. I'll give her that. Hmm. Interesting. Huh. Lame appearance change, but that's fine.
人類はいずれこの領域に到達する。ただそれが早まるだけなの。そう、あのホムンクルスの命は世界が必要としたものだったのです。違う、それは違う。誰も傷つかず、誰も怪我されず、誰も殺されない楽園。大抵の人間は良きものであろうとしている。前世などないと。そんな悲しいことを言わないでくれ。救済はそれを救い上げるのではなく押しつぶすもの。やはり私には認められないのです。
This is the dumbest argument I think I've ever seen in my entire life.
それでも英霊として聖者を
I mean, if I was a human on this planet and I found out about this, I'd be so mad at her.
主よ、この身を委ねます。絶望の後には
I mean, she looks pretty dope. I'll give her that. Not gonna lie, I expected that explosion to be a little bit bigger. Oh, does she survive this? That would. Does that make any sense? Maybe. I don't know. Whatever. Let's go. Why is he so powerful all of a sudden? Did he like absorb? Yeah, I don't follow at all. So why wasn't he able to fight like this at all like the entire time before this? I actually have no idea what the fuck's going on, to be honest with you. Alright, there's a lot to talk about here. One. Okay. They did come up with one valid argument against Shiro's thing. You know. First of all, let's talk about the basics before we talk about the one thing that they brought up that actually I can potentially get behind. And I would say there's no way I'm gonna solve it in my own head during this discussion. Because it's such an interesting question to kind of dive into. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with the basic premise. Obviously, like, as Shiro said, that's like the end goal. I mean, ever watch any sci-fi with like the theme of like humanity's evolution? Literally ever, like all of them. They all end with like humanity obtaining some level of like ascension into basically being like sentient energy, spirits, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are always the type of futuristic things or whatever, and it's always the end goal of humanity in these kind of sci-fi storylines or whatever. And it's always painted as a good thing because why wouldn't it be? You become immortal, you kind of cast aside the pettier, more evil things that have to do with humanity, and you just basically, I mean, no pain, no death, no hurting. Like, where's the downside, right? Okay. So, in that essence, and the stuff that she said where it's like, you know, like the humans have for themselves or whatever, I promise you, not even a question, it would be like 98% to like 2% minimum. If you ask every person, if we took a fucking democratic poll and asked them whatever, and then look, and then you don't have to worry, Shiro doesn't have to do it himself. They just fucking take a poll and figure that out, because every single person's going with, yeah, of course, like, of course, like, get the fuck out of here, like, what's she talking about, like, that part makes no sense. The other arguments that she had were terrible. They were just horrendously bad arguments. If I found out that she was stopping him from granting me immortality and removing all negative aspects of my life, I'd be fucking livid. I'd be losing my fucking mind. She would be the worst villain in human history. Way worse than Hitler. Like, take Hitler, right? Well, she's doing that to 7 billion people, right? Every single person in the future that dies, like, it's 100% her fault. Like, it is. She would hands down be the worst villain in the entirety of human history. Now, with that being said, there's one relatively convincing argument that was made, which is, if there's only good, humanity doesn't really have anything to strive for. Generally speaking, in reality, I actually agree with this. I actually would make an argument as well. Like, I see this conversation with a lot of people, whether or not it's political, ideological, different things like this, or whatever. I think people have gotten to the point in modern society where there is this idea that pain, negative emotion, like, everybody should just be happy all the time. Everything should be good all the time. Nobody should ever have to face any, like, hardships. Nobody should ever have to face anything negative in their lives ever. It should just be, golden. And that's not how the real world works. Like, you people need pain, people need these things. Now, greed, for example, is another thing. Like, whatever you want to talk about greed is a primary factor in self-service uh, actions are I wouldn't say I would say the primary driver of innovation in human history, most of which has come since uh, since relatively recently in some capacity, pretty much since greed has become the primary factor in human self-preservation. It's like, for example, even if you take out, like, before pre-capitalism, right? Pretty much all technological advancement prior to that was still due to that, like, kings and lords and etc etc wanting to take land from other people or protect their people. You know what I'm saying? Like, various different things. Like, those things were created not to make the people's lives better, but to further, their own self-interest, basically, or the self-interest of the people. The byproduct of which, and the reason why such things are allowed even in civilized society, is because, you know, uh, if even if it's for the wrong reasons, eventually good things happen, right? So, like, even if you want to say capitalists do things for negative reasons, right? For bad reasons like greed and stuff like that. Well, even the poorest, you know, among uh among I'm just going to use America as an example or whatever. Like, even most, like, the vast majority of people have access to, like, things like smartphones, the internet 24/7, like, things like this, right? Things that make their lives so much better than even the richest people that existed in, like, 1950. The richest person in 1950 lived a worse life than the poorest people, like, today do, basically, or whatever, in the United States, for example. Uh, Now, obviously, there's people with shitty lives, different things, whatever. I'm just talking about in terms of, like, the average monetary value. Like, the rich people in that day, they didn't have access to the things that the poorest people have access to now, or whatever. They, assuming you value those things, obviously, like, if it comes to, like, travel or things like that, uh, you know, there might be differences, but whatever. You get my point. Like, there are people, uh, that there are things that we have today that make our lives so much more convenient, so much better, etc., than there was 50, 60, 70 years ago, or whatever. And the primary factor in driving us to create those things was, like, greed, which he's saying, would be gone in this aspect. The point being is that if humanity were to become materialized as their souls and immortal, and all of the negative aspects of humanity were abandoned, would we innovate? Would we move forward anymore? Would there be a point in evolving even further and progressing even further? Well, it's an interesting question because you could also look at it on the flip side and say, well, yes, you primarily currently the driving factor. I basically have to use this as an example because I really don't have like let's just go pure. These aren't technically the exact definitions, but let's go pure like capitalism versus socialism, right? Part of the reason why things like pure socialism don't work, and once again, I'm not looking to dive into the deep technical terms of socialism as an economic strategy, but the point being is like, for example, you know, wouldn't it be nice if every single person got everything equally or whatever, and then we just did everything according to our ability and um, interests, et cetera, right? So if you had, you know, scientists or whatever making the same as janitors because the scientists can do that or whatever, and the scientists would still work hard and blah blah blah. But they wouldn't do that, right? Like if a scientist was making the same amount as a janitor, or not even somebody's not working at all. Let's say that. Let's say a scientist is working, somebody not working at all or whatever. They would just choose to not work at all because if you're going to get the same benefits anyway, why would you choose to work really hard? You could argue that that's a negative aspect of humanity as well. If that went out the window, then maybe instead of the idea that humanity wouldn't, and this is the issue with this, right? Basically, humans have been shown throughout history if you basically give them the option to fucking not do stuff, most of them are just not going to do it. Like they're not going to work harder just for the benefit of society, right? That's the point. But you could, once again, like I'm saying, you could call that a negative aspect. In which case, if that's removed as well, then maybe they would just proceed to evolve naturally without any need for these other negative factors to push them: competition, greed, you know, envy, jealousy, etc. You wouldn't necessarily need those factors to move forward because the negative aspects of humanity that uh, were forcing you to, or that were stopping you from doing them just for the goodness of everybody or whatever, are just gone. And the idea that humans are just going to sit around and do nothing after they've achieved this doesn't seem likely. So I would still lean toward plan sounds good. Like if you told me like I could just enact this by pushing a button, I'd probably push the button. I wouldn't say 100%. Like I said, I probably can't solve this like mentally in just one discussion video right after I saw it, but I'm leaning probably 75 to 80%. I would push that button to do that at the moment. I would need some hard evidence or convincing that that wouldn't be the case or whatever. So as far as I can tell, she's basically just fucking humanity here. That's what I'm getting out of this at the moment. Uh yeah, I mean, uh, as for the rest of the episode, her outfit and ability and all that kind of shit was pretty cool. Bringing in that one guy, I mean, this is what I'm saying about his plan, right? It seems like his plan doesn't really require tricking her or trying to break her mind. I get that there was a desire to avoid killing her if necessary, but it wasn't actually necessary for his plan, as we saw. Like he was basically like, "No, I'll just kill you then," or whatever. The only thing stopping him was basically Sig. Now, to be fair, there's no way he could have known that Fran was gonna somehow be part of his fucking thing or whatever. I guess, and that I mean, that's pretty hard to foresee, but like everything else, like you basically just had to get rid of him, and it was a W. There was like nobody else or nothing else that could have really stopped him here. He was just gonna win, essentially. So I just feels like they really made him kind of dumb in terms of like the strategy that he decided to go for here, as opposed to whatever. Like because for example, he just got fucked by because he would have just killed her and he wouldn't even have been injured if dude uh wouldn't have turned on them, that they decided to bring back for no reason. Although also he's just like, oh, he shouldn't have any magic power, but then he did. I didn't get that either. They didn't really explain that. I have no idea how the Fran thing locked on to dude or whatever. But yeah, Jill's or whatever. Yeah, I mean, like I said, he he was literally a net detriment because they didn't break her mind anyway because he didn't get rid of the thing that clearly was going to be able to save her. Uh, and he was aware of him, obviously. So then she doesn't get broken. Then she convinces him to switch over to her side, and then he fucks them. So like, that was such a bad plan. Like, it's so weird that he had such like a perfectly laid out plan, and then he just made some really fucking stupid mistakes. I feel like. So yeah, that was what it was. Although it was kind of, I mean, it was a relatively cool moment too. Sig kind of getting angry was kind of interesting. It is one of those things where, like, I understand they tried to play. I think this was supposed to be a big moment with him, like, being so pissed. But, like, the thing is that he displayed human emotions. I'm pretty sure he got angry at one point already when, like, Ryder was getting bullied. Uh, so, like, I think by Mordred. And maybe by the other chick too, the chick that used to be Ryder's master, Stalfo's master. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, it seemed to me like they were trying to play off throughout most of the series that he's got like he lacks these human emotions or he doesn't understand them, but like he showed like a ton of them throughout the entire series, like plenty of them, and then like eventually, like occasionally they would revert to that not being the case or whatever. So if that was what they were trying to go for, I don't think they did a great job with that. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I was expecting. I was when he first started doing his plan. I was expecting it to basically be like people, everybody was like dying from this or something, or I don't even know, or like nobody would have like any choices. Like he's not even saying that. Like they still have free will. They all live. They're all immortal. He gets rid of all the bad stuff. Like, I don't even know how to like. I don't even know what I can come up with that's like a decent analogy where it's just like perfect, 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 and then the person's like, no, that sounds shitty. Like I don't know. It's so crazy to me or whatever. Like I I mean when you talk about like Thanos, like you got people out here defending like Thanos did nothing wrong, or like who are some other ones? Ah, fuck, there was another big one that was like blah 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 did nothing wrong, sort of deal or whatever. Uh, and people are always defending them, and most of the time they're like really shitty. It was like he's killing half the people in the universe. Like you can kind of see how that's bad, and they're like, yeah, but the greater good, blah blah blah. This is like almost only good. And they're trying to like convince me that I should be kind of rooting for the other side. Like, I don't know about that. I mean, they're not really actually. I mean, it's kind of like 50-50. I think they did a decent job of portraying it as relatively even. I mean, you have one side that's got the two MCs basically, so it's really not that even, but it's closer than most of them, right? It's not like bashing you over the head with like, oh, Shiro's a piece of shit or anything like that. So I do think they did a good job with that. So that's cool. But anyway, I don't want this to go on any longer than it already has. We got one more episode. Obviously, everything's going to resolve this next episode. Uh, and we'll get a little bit of the aftermath and all that kind of stuff. Overall, I think it was pretty decent. I think with how they ended up treating the scenario and with some of the reactions looking back now that I know what the final like goal that he had was, especially with like Achilles. I don't know. Looking at different like aspects of some of this stuff, I do think that there's some real inconsistencies with character logic and personalities and what they would do and all that kind of different stuff or whatever. So I don't necessarily think. I think with all of that stuff coming into play, I'm leaning towards thinking Unlimited Blade Works is probably better at this point in time, which is too bad because I liked a lot more of the characters in the series, I think. But I think the story kind of took a little bit of a downward turn in terms of consistency and quality in that regard. The characters were way better though. A lot of the other stuff. There's also a lot of stuff that like really didn't get explored more. Like for example, I could have sworn there was something weird with like her status as like a ruler class servant. Like she was able to like control them, or she had like some sort of ace in the sleeve against. They brought that up in the beginning. They're like, oh, she's a ruler servant. Like she can, she's got like an ace in the sleeve against any of the normal servants or whatever. And like that never really came into play. They also like had when Shiro fought earlier on in the series. I guess it was just supposed to be a hint that actually he was a servant, and like we just didn't realize it because like he held his own against Fran or whatever I think it was or whatever. They're fighting in the woods and he came out to actually fight, but like it seemed like he was like trying to. He didn't really have any reason to do that other than for the audience to be like, wait a second, is he servant? Like, is he a servant class like level fighter, or is he an actual servant or something like that? It didn't really seem like he needed to go out and do that. Like he already knows he's powerful because he's a servant and he's doing all this different shit. It didn't seem like that was necessary. It made it seem like that was like a mysterious thing they were setting up. Like, oh, he came back and he's trying to like break the limits of what humans can do and become like as strong as like servants are, even though he's not a servant. It seemed like that's what they were. But then obviously he ended up being a servant, so that didn't come into play either or whatever. So that was kind of a weird setup. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of different things in this show that I think were pretty inconsistent or weird, uh, or didn't have decent payoffs or anything like that. So yeah, no, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Like I said, I like the characters. Probably. I mean, three or four out of my top like five or six characters are probably in this one over the other two. I mean, Mordred for sure is probably number one at this point. Um, I like Semi Ramis. Is that her name? Whatever. I like her. I like Shiro. I like Karna. Gilgamesh is like the one that's like not in this one that like would be a top tier one for me. Like maybe that might actually be it. It might just be Gilgamesh and then like all the like a bunch of characters from this show basically. I like Astolfo as well. I mean, there's a pretty good chunk of other ones that I liked in this as well. So a lot of really good characters. Like some of the relationships they built up and all that kind of stuff. It felt like this needed to be more like 60 or 70 episodes for them to really flesh out everything, considering how many characters they had. Then again, I don't think I would have wanted to watch this for 60 or 70 episodes. But then again, maybe it would have been set up a little bit better for his stuff to really make more sense, or maybe for him to convince other people, or for us to learn earlier on and then have more philosophical debate with this different stuff to see the pros and cons, so that it would have at least made more sense for why the servants rejected it, or why different people were rejecting it. Things of that nature. Because at this point, it was kind of just like, let's hide the reveal until the very end. Okay, here's his plan. It's all good stuff, and it's like nobody really has a chance to explain why they disagree or agree with it or whatever. Uh, like if I would have known what his plan was before this, and they had like maybe argued about it instead, you could have seen why people would have come to different like conclusions that they came to. Like you would have seen why different people fell under different things. Uh like Mordred, for example. Like if they would have just explained it, I don't think based on her personality, Mordred would have ever accepted that solution, right? And Chiron being divine, maybe he would have came to the same conclusion that uh Jean did, where he would have just been like, this isn't for us to decide. This is a human matter, basically, or whatever. So he would have, fell on that side. And then you would have had the chick that wants to save all the children. That's all she cares about. Of course, she would have chosen Shiro's side or whatever. That would have been a much more interesting way to handle this, I think, where you could have maybe introduced one more con as well to kind of get some of these things to make a little bit more sense. Because right now, I still think it's like so overwhelmingly like in the favor of doing it than it is not. But like it would have been a lot more interesting to see like the characters all find out about it and then make their decisions based on at least having the knowledge, as opposed to all, wait a minute, salvation for humanity, fucking attack him, get him out of here, fuck this guy. Like it didn't make any sense basically. So yeah, anyway, I said I was going to be done about 6 or 7 minutes ago, and then I ended up having to go on or whatever, so I'm actually going to cut it off now. Hope you guys enjoyed. Next week we'll finish out this series.
Those hands sad lights can't stop me. I just hope